My name is Nora Hayes, and 9 minutes after my divorce was finalized, I called my father and said, "Fire all 27 of them." I had waited over a year to say that sentence. I had paid for it too in ways I still have to explain to myself some nights. My father went quiet on the line. Then he asked the question I'd been praying he would ask for years. I thought that phone call would be the hardest part of my day. I was wrong. That same evening, my ex-husband's mother stood pounding on my apartment door, loud enough for the whole floor to hear. And when the screaming didn't work, she lowered her voice and offered me something far more dangerous than her anger. But here's what none of them knew. I had already found the empty shelf. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without my father. George Foster started Foster Mechanical in 1991, with a used welding rig and a truck that needed prayer to start in winter. By the time I was in high school, the company had a real building outside Dayton, and the whole place smelled like flux and burnt coffee. I did my homework in the break room. I learned to read contracts before I learned to drive, mostly because my father signed anything a friendly man slid across the table, and somebody in that family had to squint at the fine print. That somebody became my career. I put myself through law school on scholarships and night shifts at a title agency. I never took a dime from the company, and when I finally came aboard as general counsel and compliance officer, I earned the badge the same way the welders earned theirs. By last year, we had 212 employees. My father knew every name. My job was quieter contracts, risk, color-coded files. He used to joke that I read warranty cards for pleasure. He wasn't entirely wrong. Here's the thing about being the careful one, though. Everyone loves you when you catch a problem in a vendor's paperwork. They love you a lot less when the problem is sitting at their dinner table. I met James Parker at a hospital charity gala his mother chaired. He remembered my coffee order after one date. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. When he brought me home to meet his family that fall, I understood I was being presented the way you'd present a business plan. The house was beautiful from the street. Up close, my occupational habits kicked in, and I noticed the window frames were soft with rot under fresh paint. Old money with no money. I didn't have the phrase yet, but I had the feeling. His mother, Patricia, met me at the door wearing pearls at 4 in the afternoon. Over dinner, she asked what I did, and I told her I managed contracts and compliance for my father's mechanical contracting firm. She set down her fork, smiled at me like I'd passed a test I didn't know I was taking, and said, "Practical. That's exactly what this family needs." Everyone laughed warmly, and I laughed too because it sounded like a compliment. It took me 9 years to understand it was a job offer. I just wasn't the one being hired. I was the acquisition. We married 2 years later. At the reception, Patricia raised a glass and toasted, "Family takes care of family." The room applauded. My father wiped his eyes. I thought I was the luckiest woman in the county. 6 weeks after the wedding, Patricia called me directly about James's cousin, who was between opportunities and good with numbers. Purchasing had an opening. I passed the resume along, felt virtuous about disclosing the family connection, and signed his welcome packet myself. I still think about that signature. Not with guilt exactly, with the specific queasiness of a person who watched herself hold the door open and say, "Welcome, so glad you're here." He did nothing remarkable in either direction, which I'd later learn is exactly what the first one is supposed to do. Nobody sends the real cargo on the test balloon. Over the next several years, Foster Mechanical grew fast, new contracts, new hires, and somewhere in that growth a pattern started forming that I noticed the way you notice a faint smell in a house you love. A scheduling clerk who was Patricia's goddaughter. An accounts payable associate whose mother played tennis with Patricia on Tuesdays. An estimator James vouched for, from a network that turned out to be entirely his mother's friends. Every hire went through our new HR director, who had come to us on Patricia's glowing recommendation, after our old HR manager retired suddenly with a package nobody remembered approving. I raised it once in a leadership meeting. I said the referral concentration was getting high. The HR director laughed kindly, the way you laugh at a child afraid of the dark. "Nora reads warranty cards for fun," she said, and the room chuckled because that was my brand. My brand made me easy to dismiss. I didn't let it go, though. I wrote a memo. I updated our conflict of interest form and made every new hire sign it. Felt like doing something. Years later, those signed forms would matter more than I could have known. But a form is a seatbelt. It doesn't stop the other driver from aiming at you. By the time I counted, there were 11 hires with Parker fingerprints on them. I was about to learn how they get to 27. That fall, my father had a heart attack on the shop floor. He lived, I need you to know that right away, but he was out of the building for 8 months and the building noticed. While I was choosing my father's heartbeat over the org chart, James's younger brother, Andrew, volunteered to help out temporarily. Temporary became a desk. The desk became a title, Operations Director. James, who joined the company 2 years earlier in a role his mother had somehow negotiated into existence over a dinner I wasn't at, started introducing Andrew to our municipal contacts. 16 more people came aboard in those 8 months, while I sat in a cardiac ward holding my mother's hand. When my father finally came back, thinner, slower, he looked at the new org chart and said it was nice to see fresh energy. I looked at the same chart and saw a transplant the body hadn't approved. I told him so gently with the door shut. He held up a hand, tired. "You don't fire family," he said. Not angry. Certain. The way he was certain about well temperatures and honest handshakes. I didn't have proof yet. What I had was a feeling and a legal pad. One night I sat at my kitchen table and drew the company out. Every hire since my wedding, every referral line. Then I took a red pen and circled everyone connected to the Parkers by blood, marriage, or tennis. I counted the circles twice because I didn't believe the number. 27. Sitting in purchasing, accounts payable, estimating, HR, and operations, which, if you know anything about how money leaves a company, is not a random distribution. It's a supply chain. I brought the pad to my father. He studied it a long minute, and something flickered in his face. Then he slid it back across the desk. "They're good people, Nor. You don't fire family." He meant it as a principle. His mother-in-law had spent years making sure it would function as a password. I couldn't get his signature, so I did what I could alone. I tightened approval thresholds. I required dual sign-off on new vendors. I quietly flagged my own access to every purchasing record in the system. It felt like sandbagging before a storm everyone else insisted was sunshine. 2 months later, I found purchase order 7734. And nothing about my life was quiet again. I'd been reconciling quarterly budgets against commodity indexes. Copper had dipped that quarter. Our copper costs hadn't. I pulled 2 years of invoices from a fitting supplier called Summit Line Supply and found we were paying, on average, 22% above market. 22% on a category that size is a second mortgage every year. The company was 5 years old. It had been added to our approved vendor list during my father's recovery, with a single signature, Andrews. Its address was a suite in an office park that, for a supposed pipe distributor, looked a lot like a cattle ranch headquartered in a studio apartment. Its website had 3 pages of stock photos, one of which still showed a competing forklift company's watermark in the corner. I didn't march into anyone's office. I'd already been the woman who cried pattern once, and I'd watched a room of grown men turn my diligence into a punchline. This time I would count every brick before I said the word wall. For 3 weeks, my dining table stopped being a dining table. I laid 5 years of invoices out by quarter, taped index cards to the wall, and found that Summit Line's prices crept up in small increments, always a hair under the threshold that required a second signature, the exact threshold I had set myself. Someone had studied my fences and built their gate 1 inch below the top rail. And a handful of the largest purchase orders, the fattest ones, were for materials I couldn't match to any job number at all. Copper fittings for projects that didn't exist, received according to signed, initialed logs that were beginning to look less like paperwork and more like fiction. I asked James about it over a dinner I'd cooked specifically to make the conversation feel casual, which tells you something about the marriage we'd built. His fork paused for half a second. If you've never watched someone you love pause for half a second, I don't recommend it. "Mom knows the owner," he said, smiling. "It's fine, Nor. They're solid people. We didn't fight." Nobody raised a voice. But something had ended at that table, and we both knew it, the way you know a bone is broken before the X-ray. I went to my father with a one-page comparison so simple a child could follow it. He read it twice, and for one glorious minute I watched my actual father surface. The man who once drove a supplier off the lot for padding a fuel surcharge. Then his jaw set, and he said he'd look into it quietly. I made the mistake of believing that sentence meant what the word said. I left his office at 11:40 that morning. By 6:15 that evening, Patricia arrived at my parents' house with a lasagna unannounced, for the first time in 4 months. She never once mentioned Summit Line. She didn't have to. She wasn't rebutting my evidence. She was recategorizing me. From professional to worried daughter, from auditor to stressed wife. By the weekend my father was patting my hand, telling me maybe I should take some time off. And that Monday, for the first time in my life at my own family's company, I got a meeting invitation from HR with no agenda line. 3 employees had filed complaints against me. All 3 were on my list of 27. It was suggested, in the passive voice where all corporate violence lives, that I work from home for a while for everyone's comfort. My badge still worked technically, but I was out of the building and Andrew was signing for operations, and my father was telling me exhausted that maybe some space was healthy while things calmed down. I had one afternoon left inside that building, and I spent it walking the warehouse floor with a clipboard, looking like a woman doing inventory, feeling like a woman robbing her own bank. Bay 12. Third shelf. According to the receiving log, $84,000 of copper fittings had been signed for and stocked there the previous fall. I stood in front of it for a long time. The shelf was empty. Not recently emptied, empty. Dust lay across it in one smooth, undisturbed gray blanket, the kind that takes seasons to settle. No drag marks. No fork truck scuffs on the concrete below. Whatever that paperwork swore had arrived, and been unloaded and shelved right there, had never touched that steel. I took out my phone, photographed the dust in the cold aisle light, and understood fully and finally that I had never been paranoid. And everything was about to get much worse before it got better. I gave James one last door, and I wanted on the record that I held it open with both hands. It was a Sunday, almost a year after the lasagna. I put the shelf photos on our kitchen island next to the Summit Line summary and said, "Stand next to me. We take this to my father together. Whatever your family did, you're not part of it as of today." James looked at the photos for a long time. Then my husband, the man who remembered my coffee order, said, "You're asking me to choose against my mother. Family takes care of family, Nor." There it was. His mother's toast, 9 years later, coming out of her son's mouth like a returned product. I finally heard the sentence for what it had always been. Not a promise of shelter. A claim of ownership. A definition of family with a ledger where the love should be. And I was on the wrong page of it. "Okay," I said. "Just that." I filed for divorce that Thursday. My attorney, Rachel Carter, took away my only weapon in our first meeting. "From now until the decree is final, you touch nothing at that company. No firings, no vendor cancellations, no fraud memos. The moment you start firing his relatives, you're not a whistleblower. You're a vindictive wife sabotaging a marital asset. Every true thing you say gets read as strategy." So I waited. I hired a forensic accountant named Priya out of Cincinnati and paid her with the down payment on a house I no longer needed. Nights and weekends, my father's controller of 22 years, the first person inside the walls who believed me, walked me through ledger exports he was fully authorized and quietly terrified to share. We reconstructed 5 years of Summit Line. Every invoice, every phantom purchase order, every receiving log signed with the same tight little initials. And buried in my own contract files, I found the clause that reorganized my entire calendar. The Summit Line supply agreement auto-renewed for 5 more years unless canceled. In writing, 30 days before its expiration. I checked the date. Then I checked my divorce's procedural history against it, delay by delay, and the math was almost elegant. The decree would land roughly 48 hours before the last legal day to cancel. They hadn't been stalling out of spite. They were running out the clock on a contract, betting a newly divorced woman wouldn't turn around and start a corporate war inside 2 days. Priya's final report arrived in the spring. A spiral-bound accounting of $1.9 million in overcharges and phantom purchases, routed from Foster Mechanical through Summit Line to a management entity whose registered agent was a name I recognized from a thin, forgettable website, Patricia's own first cousin. 5 weeks before trial, Patricia made her move. Dressed as peace, family mediation, and folded inside it an actual offer. The Parkers would drop their demand to have the company valued as a marital asset if I signed a confidentiality agreement covering everything. Read that twice. They'd stop pretending they deserved a slice of my father's company, in exchange for my silence about why they didn't. I declined without a counteroffer. They got louder. Word reached me that Patricia was telling her circle I'd had some kind of breakdown. That's when I broke my own rule, half of it. On a quiet weekend, I set Priya's report in front of my father and said nothing while he read. 40 minutes. Somewhere around the receiving log appendix, his hands went still. "You don't fire family," he said. But it came out smaller this time. "Not a law. A question." "No, Dad," I said, taking his hand. "You don't. But somebody redefined family while we weren't looking, and I need you to trust me about what happens next." At the final settlement conference, I traded almost everything for one clause. $40,000 from the house sale, no spousal support, no retirement split, in exchange for every Parker, by name and by entity, permanently releasing any claim against Foster Mechanical. They signed so fast the notary asked them to slow down. $250,000 of walk-away money from the woman they assumed was too tired to fight. The decree was signed at 9:31 that morning. 47 hours remained on the cancellation window. At 9:49 divorced, I called my father. "It's time. Fire all 27. The labor attorney has the letters." There was a pause, and in it I could hear years of "you don't fire family" being set down gently, like a tool that no longer fit the job. "Already got my boots on," he said. 27 meetings, 10 minutes each, documented and boring on purpose. No shouting. The HR director who'd once laughed at my pattern comment went first, and said almost nothing at all. "Professionals don't argue, they call someone." Andrew argued, then cited his own initials on the receiving logs as proof of his diligence, which the labor attorney wrote down very slowly while Andrew watched him do it. By 4 that afternoon it was done. I was standing in my kitchen when the knocking started. Hard, flat-handed. Patricia had never once visited my apartment. But my address was in the court papers now, and there she was through the peephole, pearls and a wool coat in June. I opened it because you don't get a scene like this twice in your life. 27 people. Ungrateful. Vindictive. She filled the apartment wall to wall. 2 years earlier, that voice could have reorganized my nervous system. Now it was just weather against a window. Then she recalibrated. Sat down on my sofa uninvited. Softened. "Let me offer you something reasonable, sweetheart. Bring back the 15 genuinely innocent ones. Sign mutual confidentiality. No one ever needs to know. You're so good at keeping things smooth. It's the best of you." There it was, my whole nature, appraised and handed back to me as a compliment by the one person who'd always known exactly how to use it. "Patricia," I said. "Who signed your welcome packet?" She went still. For 1 second, the only one I ever saw, she wasn't performing. "My mother owned a flower shop," she said, and her voice had gravel in it I'd never heard. "It was collateral for my father-in-law's debts. Nobody asked her. She found out at Thanksgiving and set the table anyway." She smoothed her coat, and the gravel disappeared back under the pavement. I learned young. A woman in these families is either useful or she's furniture. That's not cruelty. That's how the world runs. I felt the near miss of actual pity. It was there and it was real. If she'd stopped talking right then, this might be a different story. She didn't. She delivered her exit line instead. Something about the family name becoming a punchline, about my father's heart, about what I was choosing. Then she let herself out, confident the math would do her work for her. It didn't. The next morning, in a conference room with our bonding company and our biggest client watching, I put up a photo of an empty steel shelf and told them everything: Summit Line, the $1.9 million, the 27 terminations, calm as a weather report. Then I signed the cancellation letter with 24 hours left on the clock and handed it off for certified mail. Cost us. Our biggest client paused a major contract pending their own review. My father flinched. I didn't because I'd already paid that bill once alone, at 1 a.m. with cold tea. Their audit 6 weeks later found exactly what we'd told them it would find and nothing we hadn't disclosed. They stayed and told my father it was the only reason they had. The fraud case ended in a civil settlement. No handcuffs, just money paid back over 4 years. 2 of the 27 sued for wrongful termination. Both cases died on the conflict of interest forms I'd made everyone sign years earlier, back when I was the woman who read warranty cards for fun. The Parkers' lights stayed on. Patricia still chairs her charity galas. James was engaged again by fall, to a woman his mother introduced him to. Their world kept turning. It just doesn't turn through us anymore. Months later, my father asked me to walk the warehouse with him, which is his love language and always has been. We stopped at Bay 12, third shelf. It was stacked with real copper fittings this time, job numbered, from a distributor we'd vetted 3 ways. I fired family, he said finally. Should have listened to family. That was the entire apology I got. And if you knew him, you'd know it was a cathedral. Then he offered me the company's presidency, him staying on as chairman. I said yes on one condition: every hire from now on goes through a 3-person panel, no exceptions no matter whose name it carries. He laughed, then saw I meant it, and shook my hand like a man signing something. At the company picnic that fall, I wore my new badge for the first time. A welder's kid standing next to a shelf you could finally trust, wearing her own name, the one nobody planted, the one I'd finally stopped apologizing for reading the fine print with. Keeping the peace is not the same as keeping the family. Sometimes the loudest thing you can do for the people you love is to finally stop being quiet.